I tasted rain and judgment in the same breath as the carriage halted before Beaumont Hall's formidable gates. Here, where ancient stone met endless sky, my stained reputation preceded me, a silent accusation in the relentless downpour. The carriage jolted, then resumed its slow, grinding ascent along a long, winding drive, each revolution of the wheels pulling me deeper into the estate's formidable shadow. The hall itself loomed through the misty rain, a vast, imposing structure that seemed to sigh with ancient sorrows. When the heavy door finally swung open, it revealed not a warm welcome, but the stiff, disapproving figure of Mr. Caldwell, the estate manager. His gaze, sharp and assessing, swept over my modest traveling cloak, lingering on my face as if searching for some visible mark of my past disgrace. "Miss Vance, I presume?" His voice was a dry rustle, devoid of warmth. "You are expected. Though I confess, the Duke's instructions regarding your engagement were rather unconventional." I met his gaze steadily, refusing to flinch. "I assure you, Mr. Caldwell, my purpose here is solely to serve Lady Clara and to do so with diligence." My voice, though soft, carried a firmness I hoped would convey my resolve. He merely grunted, a sound of thinly veiled skepticism, before turning to lead me through the cavernous entrance hall. Its grandiosity felt less like welcome and more like a cold, echoing tomb. As Mr. Caldwell led me down a dimly lit corridor, a sliver of light escaped a partially open door. Curiosity, a dangerous companion in a house of secrets, pulled my gaze. Within, silhouetted against the rich mahogany of a grand desk, stood a man whose very posture spoke of an unbearable burden. Lord Alaric Beaumont. He was taller than I had imagined, his frame rigid, his dark head bowed slightly as if contemplating a profound sorrow. Even from this distance, the aura of his grief was palpable, a heavy cloak that seemed to absorb all light and warmth. He held a letter, its edges crinkled, in hands that appeared clenched in quiet anguish. My heart, which had steeled itself against the coldness of this place, felt a sudden, unexpected pang of pity. This was not merely an aloof duke. This was a man profoundly broken. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, a sharp sound that made the duke flinch imperceptibly, and I quickly averted my gaze, retreating into the shadows of the corridor before my presence could be noted. The fleeting glimpse had revealed more than I was prepared for, complicating my carefully constructed perception of the formidable duke. My modest rooms, though clean, offered little comfort beyond a flickering hearth. The lingering chill of the hall seemed to seep into the very stones. After settling my few belongings, I found myself drawn by a faint glow emanating from an adjacent wing. Following the light, I discovered a door ajar, revealing what could only be Lady Clara's nursery. It was a poignant tableau of forgotten childhood. Dust motes danced in the solitary light of a sputtering candle, casting long, mournful shadows across faded wallpaper adorned with playful cherubs. A wooden rocking horse lay on its side. A small porcelain doll gazed blankly from a forgotten chair, its tiny dress askew. The room spoke of a life abruptly paused, a child's joy extinguished. A profound sadness settled upon me, a tangible ache for the unseen child whose world had shrunk to this silent, dusty space. The single candle on the mantelpiece seemed to weep waxen tears, its weak flame struggling against the encroaching gloom. I picked up the doll, smoothing its rumpled dress, feeling a nascent sense of purpose stir within me. This child, so clearly neglected and grieving, was my charge now. My duty was clear, to bring warmth and life back into this desolate corner of Beaumont Hall, even if I had to defy the shadows myself. The next morning, the promise of a new day felt like a fragile hope within the silent confines of Beaumont Hall. I dressed carefully in my plainest gown, prepared to meet Lady Clara. I found her in a small sitting room, curled in a large armchair, gazing out a window at the Rain Street garden. She was a wisp of a child, perhaps 7 years old, with hair the color of weak tea and eyes that, when she finally turned them towards me, held the vast, mournful depth of an ancient pool. "Lady Clara," I began gently, kneeling so that our eyes were almost level, "I am Eleanor Vance, your new governess." She made no sound, merely observed me with an unnerving stillness. Her small hands clutched a worn wooden bird, its painted feathers chipped and faded. Her silence, profound and eloquent, spoke volumes of her loneliness. "It is a lovely bird," I offered, my voice soft, not pressing her for a response. "Does it have a name?" Her gaze flickered to the toy, then back to me. A tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. My heart ached for her, for the palpable isolation that clung to her like a shroud. I imagined the joy that must once have filled this room, now replaced by an oppressive quiet. "Perhaps we might give it a name together if you wished," I suggested, offering a small, encouraging smile. She lowered her eyes again, but this time a faint tremor ran through her small frame. It was not a sign of fear, I sensed, but perhaps of a long dormant hope stirring within her. I sat on a low stool opposite her, keeping a respectful distance. My own bird, a robin I once befriended in a garden, was a spirited creature. He would sing so beautifully each morning. I spoke of small, ordinary things, of wildflowers and sunlit paths, of stories I had read as a child. Clara listened, her head slightly tilted, her gaze occasionally lifting to mine, then retreating to the safety of the window. After a long while, as the morning light strengthened, a whisper faint as a butterfly's wing escaped her lips. "Rose." It was barely audible, but I heard it. The bird. Rose. My breath hitched. It was a beginning, a fragile thread spun from the depths of her silent world. "Rose," I repeated, a genuine smile gracing my lips. A perfect name for a beautiful bird. In that moment, watching the faintest hint of a smile touch her own lips, I resolved that whatever darkness lingered in Beaumont Hall, I would bring light back to Lady Clara's world. The heavens wept beyond my window, a tempest lashing against the thick panes of glass that separated my small sitting room from the wild, encroaching night. Rain streaked down, blurring the outlines of ancient trees, each drop mirroring the countless whispers that had followed me from my last post. I saw my own reflection in the glass, a pale, determined face framed by shadows, and the familiar ache of unearned shame tightened in my chest. Could I truly wash away the stain of a false accusation, here in this grand, desolate hall? The task ahead felt as daunting as scaling the highest peak, yet my resolve, though quiet, was unyielding. This was not merely about securing a livelihood. It was about proving my worth, not just to the world, but to myself. The flickering hearth beside me offered little warmth against the chill that seeped from the very stones of Beaumont Hall, a chill that seemed to settle not just on the air, but on the spirit. The following morning, a crisp autumnal light struggled to pierce the estate's heavy draperies, but my own determination was unclouded. I set about establishing a more structured routine for Lady Clara, beginning with a planned hour in the children's wing for drawing lessons. My suggestions, however, were met with an almost imperceptible stiffening from Mrs. Davies, the long-serving head housekeeper, and a flicker of disapproval in the eyes of the footman who passed us in the corridor. "Lady Clara has always preferred her solitude in the mornings, Miss Vance," Mrs. Davies stated, her tone polite yet unyielding as she placed Clara's breakfast tray in the same quiet corner it always occupied. "It suits her delicate constitution." The words were a thinly veiled rebuke, a reminder of my status as an outsider. I offered a calm smile, explaining the benefits of varied activity for a child's development, but the resistance was palpable, rooted in years of unquestioned tradition and an unspoken loyalty to the old ways. It seemed I would not only teach Clara, but navigate an entire household of unseen eyes. Later that afternoon, in the seldom-used drawing room, a fragile sense of peace settled between Clara and me. I had forgone the usual dreary primers, opting instead for a vibrant set of watercolors and a tale of mischievous garden sprites. Clara, initially hesitant, soon found her small fingers guiding the brush, a faint smile playing on her lips as she painted a tiny, brilliant blue bird. Her concentration was absolute, a delicate blossom unfolding in the quiet room. From the corner of my eye, I caught a fleeting shadow in the doorway. Lord Alaric, rigid and silent as a statue, stood observing us. His presence was of familiar weight, but this time he did not immediately retreat. His gaze, though distant, lingered on Clara's animated face, on the small, joyful masterpiece taking shape beneath her hand. A beam of sunlight, finding a gap in the heavy curtains, touched the scene, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air around us, and for a brief, hopeful moment, it felt as though the very hall held its breath. Then with a quiet, almost imperceptible turn, he was gone, a phantom retreating into the shadows. Yet a warmth bloomed within me, a fleeting sense of validation, even if unseen, that my efforts were not entirely in vain. The estate library, a cavernous room filled with the scent of aged leather and forgotten lore, became a refuge for me during my free hours. One blustery afternoon, while searching for a book on botany to share with Clara, I encountered Mrs. Evelyn Albright, a distant relative of the Duke and a woman known for her kind heart. Her silver hair was neatly pinned, and her eyes held a gentle, knowing quality. "Forgive my intrusion, Miss Vance," she said, her voice soft as rustling leaves. "I heard Lady Clara's laughter the other day. It was a most welcome sound." My heart warmed at her words. "She is a bright child, Mrs. Albright, merely in need of a little encouragement." Mrs. Albright nodded, her gaze drifting to a portrait of the late Duchess. "Indeed, though the Duchess, bless her heart, always seemed to carry a burden, a rather fragile spirit, if you understand me. Such a pity." Her words were laced with a melancholic tenderness, a subtle difference from the hushed, vague rumors I'd overheard about the Duchess's sudden decline. "Was she often unwell?" I asked, trying to sound merely curious. Mrs. Albright hesitated, her fingers tracing the spine of a book. "Not in body, perhaps, but the mind can be a more treacherous landscape, can it not? Beaumont Hall can be a lonely place, even for a duchess." Her gentle evasiveness only fueled my intrigue, connecting the Duchess's unspoken sadness with the Duke's impenetrable grief. The main staircase of Beaumont Hall, a sweeping expanse of polished oak and intricate banisters, often felt like a stage for unspoken dramas. One late evening, as I descended to retrieve a forgotten book from the drawing room, a tall figure emerged from the shadows at the landing above. Lord Alaric. My steps faltered, but I quickly regained my composure, offering a polite curtsy. He paused, his hand on the newel post, his silhouette stark against the faint moonlight filtering through a high window. As I reached the heavy oak door leading to the drawing room, it swung slightly, threatening to close with a resounding thud. Without a word or even a direct glance, the Duke extended his arm, holding the door open for me. His movement was swift, almost imperceptible, yet deliberate. "Thank you, Your Grace," I murmured, my voice a quiet breath in the vast silence. He merely offered a curt, almost imperceptible nod, his pale blue eyes meeting mine for only a fraction of a second before he continued his descent, his footsteps echoing softly. It was a small gesture, perhaps born of mere courtesy, yet it carried an unexpected warmth, a flicker of the man beneath the Duke, a challenge to my initial perception of his coldness. A fragile sunbeam pierced the heavy draperies of Lady Clara's playroom, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny sprites. It had been weeks since I arrived at Beaumont Hall, and the room, once shrouded in gloom, now hummed with a quiet, joyful energy. Toys were no longer forgotten, but arranged for play. Books lay open on the small table where Clara and I had just finished a lesson. I had introduced a game of charades, a simple diversion I'd learned in my own youth, hoping to coax a genuine smile from the child. Clara, still reserved, mimed a bird with fluttering hands, her eyes wide with concentration. "A robin!" I exclaimed, perhaps a little too enthusiastically, and she shook her head, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "A pigeon?" Another shake. A swift?" Her small face broke into a spontaneous, utterly delightful giggle. The sound, light and pure, was like the chime of a forgotten bell, echoing through the high ceilings. It was the first time I had ever heard her truly laugh, a sound that seemed to chase away the shadows clinging to the ancient walls. My heart swelled with a quiet triumph, a warmth I hadn't realized I craved. Clara's eyes, once downcast, now sparkled with a light I had worked so hard to rekindle. My smile mirrored hers, a reflection of the small, precious victory we had won together. The sunbeam seemed to grow brighter, bathing us in its golden glow, and for a moment the heavy atmosphere of Beaumont Hall lifted. The sound of Clara's laughter, a whisper of pure happiness, surely carried beyond the playroom door, a beacon of hope in the quiet corridors. One brisk afternoon, seeking a break from our lessons, Clara and I ventured into a rarely explored section of the estate grounds. The paths were overgrown, choked with weeds, and the air held the damp scent of neglected earth. Behind a crumbling stone wall draped with ivy, we discovered a forgotten walled garden. Its gate, rusted and heavy, yielded with a mournful creak, revealing a scene of wild, untamed beauty. Ancient rose bushes, long abandoned, tangled their thorny branches together. But amidst the wild disarray, a single bush, sheltered by the wall, boasted a solitary bloom. Its petals, a vibrant crimson, defied the encroaching wilderness, a testament to enduring life. Clara, her usual shyness momentarily forgotten, pointed a small finger at the resilient flower. "A rose," she whispered, her voice filled with a wonder that mirrored my own. I knelt beside her, my gaze drawn to the struggling beauty. This neglected garden felt like a metaphor for Clara herself, and perhaps for me, a place that, despite hardship, held the potential for exquisite beauty. To bring life and order to this wild space felt like a sacred duty, a mirroring of the nurture I hoped to offer Clara. I traced the delicate curve of the rose petal, reflecting on how even the most overlooked corners could blossom with care. Here, amidst the quiet decay, a seed of hope had been planted, a promise of restoration. The following morning, I found myself in the Duke's breakfast room, a space that usually felt heavy with unspoken grief. Clara sat beside me, her posture a little less rigid, her eyes brighter as she ate her porridge. She even offered a small, hesitant comment about the weather, a stark contrast to her previous silence. Lord Alaric, seated at the head of the table, observed us from beneath his heavy brow. His gaze, though still distant, held a flicker of something new as he watched Clara. "Lady Clara seems more at ease," he stated, his voice a low rumble. It was not a question, nor a direct compliment, but an observation charged with unspoken meaning. I maintained my composed exterior, offering a polite nod. "She is a remarkable child, Your Grace. She merely needed a gentle hand and a renewed sense of purpose." His eyes, usually so guarded, met mine for a fleeting moment. Then almost imperceptibly, he offered a slight, swift nod. It was a minuscule gesture, easily missed, yet it resonated within me like a deep chord. No words were exchanged, no overt praise given, but in that silent acknowledgement, I felt a quiet sense of validation. It was a small step, yet significant in the slow, arduous process of building trust within this somber household. A cautious optimism began to bloom within me. Later that week, a necessary errand took me to the village, a small cluster of cottages and shops nestled at the foot of the Beaumont estate. I needed specific supplies for Clara's art lessons, materials not easily found within the hall stores. As I collected my purchases from the apothecary, I encountered Dr. Julian Albright, a man whose kind eyes and gentle demeanor had already impressed me. He was of an age with Lord Alaric, perhaps a few years his senior, with a quiet air of wisdom. "Miss Vance," he greeted, his voice warm, "I trust your duties at the hall are proving fulfilling?" His tone was laced with genuine curiosity, not the veiled judgment I had grown accustomed to. I offered a careful smile. "Lady Clara is a delight, Doctor. The hall, however, holds its own unique challenges." He nodded slowly, his gaze perceptive. "Indeed it does. A house can carry much unspoken history. I have seen the young Lady Clara about the village. She appears to have blossomed under your care. That is a testament to your compassion, Miss Vance." His words were a balm to my spirit. To be seen, truly seen, as something more than just a governess with a questionable past was a rare comfort. I felt a flicker of potential camaraderie, a sense that here in this quiet village, I might find an ally. One afternoon, while reorganizing a dusty, unused dressing room that had been converted into storage, my fingers brushed against something hard beneath a pile of faded silks. I pulled it free, and in my palm lay a sapphire ring, its deep blue stone glinting eerily in the dim light. It was clearly a piece of significant value, and the exquisite craftsmanship spoke of an aristocratic provenance. I recognized it from a miniature portrait of the late Duchess I had seen in a forgotten corner of the drawing room. This, then, was hers. A morbid fascination settled over me as I turned the ring, its facets catching the faint light. This sapphire, once a symbol of prestige and love, now felt like a relic of sorrow. It conjured images of the Duchess, her delicate hand, the life she had led within these walls. A life that had ended too soon and too mysteriously. What stories did this ring hold? Did it whisper of happiness, or of the quiet despair that seemed to cling to Beaumont Hall like a shroud? The weight of the ring felt heavy in my hand, a palpable link to the past. It spoke of a woman whose presence still permeated the very air of the estate, whose memory continued to cast a long shadow over Lord Alaric. I carefully placed the ring back where I found it, a shiver running down my spine. Its unsettling presence lingered, a silent testament to a tragedy I was only just beginning to comprehend. It was late one evening when I passed Lord Alaric's study. The door was ajar, and a single lamp cast a pool of light across his massive mahogany desk. He was nowhere to be seen, but a stack of ledgers, accounts meticulously kept, yet in a state of disarray, lay before an open book. I noticed a particular ledger, its pages fluttering in a stray draft, clearly left open to a complex financial statement. It seemed a silent plea for order in a world burdened by grief. The next morning, before the household stirred, I returned to the study. Without a word, without a sound, I meticulously organized the ledgers. I aligned the pages, cross-referenced the figures, and gently closed the open book, leaving the desk tidy and coherent. It was a subtle act, an unspoken offer of assistance in the chaos of his burdens. Later, as I supervised Clara's morning lessons, I saw Lord Alaric pass by the study door. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the now-ordered desk. A flicker, quick as a hummingbird's wing, crossed his eyes. A flash of surprise, perhaps, then a hint of gratitude. He said nothing, of course, but his posture seemed to ease, almost imperceptibly. The silent understanding that passed between us, a recognition of my competence and his unspoken need, was more profound than any spoken word. The aroma of spiced apple tarts mingled with the sweet scent of chamomile, a rare and welcome fragrance within the usually somber walls of Beaumont Hall. I had transformed Lady Clara's playroom into a miniature wonderland for our afternoon tea, draping soft linens over a small table and arranging a collection of porcelain doll teacups. Clara, usually a creature of quiet shadows, watched with wide, excited eyes as I poured imaginary tea. "More sugar, please, Miss Vance," she chirped, pushing a tiny cup forward. It was a simple request, yet the lilt in her voice, the genuine animation in her expression, was a triumph. I had not heard such unfettered joy from her before. We laughed over clumsy doll etiquette and the ridiculous stories I invented for their tiny guests, a sound so pure it felt like a rebellion against the hall's pervasive grief. Her little hand, sticky with jam, reached for mine, and in that fleeting touch I felt a deep, quiet satisfaction. This small, joyful rebellion was precisely what this house needed. That evening, the grand dining hall glittered under the magnificent chandelier, its myriad crystals shedding a cascade of light upon the polished mahogany. The usual silence that accompanied dinner was broken only by the clink of silverware. But tonight, a different tension hummed beneath the surface. Lord Alaric sat at the head of the table, his gaze distant. Yet I felt his attention shift when Clara, with newfound confidence, recounted a small anecdote from our afternoon. Her voice, though still soft, carried a lightness that had been absent for so long. "Miss Vance has brought a remarkable change to Clara's disposition," Lord Alaric stated, his voice cutting through the hushed room. It was not a question, but an observation, delivered with a rare direct glance toward me. The light from the chandelier seemed to intensify, momentarily spotlighting my presence. Mr. Caldwell, seated opposite, stiffened, his fork pausing mid-air. I met Alaric's gaze with a composed nod, acknowledging the unspoken challenge to the estate manager's thinly veiled disapproval. "Her methods are effective." His words were few, yet they resonated with the weight of his rare approval, a quiet but potent shift in the hall's delicate power dynamics. I felt a quiet power, a sense of validation that tightened my resolve. Later that week, seeking a moment of respite from the rigid formality of the main household, I found myself drawn to the warm, bustling heart of the servants' quarters. The kitchen, a haven of steaming kettles and fragrant spices, was a world apart. Cook, a stout woman with kind eyes and hands worn from years of kneading dough, hummed a tuneless melody as she stirred a simmering pot. "You've a way with the little one, Miss Vance," she observed, her voice surprisingly gentle. "Reminds me a bit of her ladyship, the late Duchess. Always a gentle soul she was, but fragile." She sighed, her gaze drifting to the flickering fire. She carried a great sadness, that one. So sensitive to any harsh word, any slight. Often seemed quite lost in these grand halls, poor dear, like a rose planted in a shadowed corner. I listened, absorbing every word, contrasting it with the vague, dismissive whispers I had heard of her. The cook's words painted a more compassionate picture. A woman struggling with an unseen burden, not the indifferent noble I had imagined. My heart ached for her, and a new layer of understanding began to form, like layers of mist lifting from a hidden lake. The estate library, a towering cavern of silent knowledge, often became my refuge in the late evenings. One night I was reaching for a lesser-known volume on ancient Roman history when a deep voice startled me. "A fascinating choice, Miss Vance. Not many venture beyond the popular romances." Lord Alaric stood a few paces away, a leather-bound tome in his hand. Our eyes met, and in that shared moment, the usual barriers between us seemed to dissolve. We spoke of authors and philosophies, of the weight of history and the fleeting nature of human endeavor. He possessed a keen intellect, surprising in its depth, and a passion for learning that few in society seemed to cultivate. I found myself debating with him, my thoughts flowing freely, unburdened by the usual constraints of my position. His hand gestured over a text, and the elegant movement, the sheer authority of his knowledge, was captivating. As the soft lamplight cast long shadows around us, a comfortable intimacy settled between us, an unspoken acknowledgement of a connection that transcended our roles as Duke and Governess. When he finally bid me good night, his gaze lingered, and I felt a warmth bloom in my chest, a fragile, exquisite thing I dared not name. Back in my small sitting room, the quiet hum of the hall now felt less oppressive, more like the steady pulse of a living thing. I sat at my desk, reviewing the small triumphs of the past weeks: Clara's first genuine laugh, the Duke's unexpected commendation, the cook's gentle remembrances of the late Duchess. Each small victory was a seed of purpose growing within me. I had come to Beaumont Hall a disgraced governess, my reputation stained by a past I could not control. Yet here, in this shadowed place, I was finding a strength, a voice I hadn't known I possessed. I realized now that my worth was not tied to societal approval or past employment. It was found in the quiet work of nurturing a child's spirit, in seeking truth, in bringing light to forgotten corners. When does one's true calling reveal itself, if not in the crucible of unexpected challenges? My past dismissal, once a source of bitter shame, now felt like a liberation, pushing me onto a path I would never have chosen, yet one that was undeniably mine. This newfound sense of purpose hardened my resolve, steeling me for whatever future trials might come my way. The west wing of Beaumont Hall rarely saw the light of day, its long corridor shrouded in a perpetual twilight, even at noon. It was here, tucked between a forgotten linen press and a towering, dust-sheeted armoire, that I found her. A portrait, its colors muted by time, depicting a woman with hair the shade of burnished copper and eyes that held the deepest, most unsettling blue I had ever seen. It was the late Duchess, I realized, her likeness gazing out from beneath a film of dust. The style of her gown, though elegant, spoke of an era just past. My gaze lingered on her face, searching for the regal confidence one expected of a duchess. Instead, I saw a subtle tremor in the corners of her mouth, and her beautiful eyes, though framed by a faint smile, held an undeniable sadness. It was a melancholy that resonated with the very air of Beaumont Hall, a quiet ache that seemed to cling to the velvet and stone. A pang of sympathy, sharp and unexpected, pierced through my heart. This was not the woman of society whispers, Not the ethereal beauty whose absence shrouded the Duke in gloom, but a woman who had known a private sorrow. I felt an inexplicable urge to understand, to peel back the layers of dust and time that obscured her truth. The sadness in her painted eyes became a silent question, stirring a new resolve within me. My duties often led me to explore the forgotten corners of the hall, a silent exploration that usually yielded only dust and echoes. But one afternoon, a heavy, ornate door on the second floor, distinct from the others, caught my attention. It was sealed, not merely closed, but secured with a rusty, elaborate lock that suggested a deliberate act of exclusion. This, I surmised, was the bedchamber of the late Duchess. A chill ran down my spine, not of fear, but of profound intrigue. Why was this room, so central to the estate's recent tragedy, kept in such deliberate isolation? Had the Duke sealed it away in his grief, or was there another, less visible force at play? I reached out, my fingers tracing the cold metal of the lock, a tangible barrier against the secrets held within. Every fiber of my being urged me to unlock it, to peel back the veil of mystery that clung to this place. Was I overstepping my bounds, venturing into a private sorrow that was not mine to disturb? Perhaps. But the image of Clara's wistful gaze and the profound sadness in the Duchess's portrait hardened my resolve. The truth, I felt, deserved to see the light. My determination to find answers solidified, overriding any lingering hesitation about propriety. The rose garden, once choked with weeds, was now responding to my tender care, a vibrant oasis amidst the hall's somber stone. It was here, amidst the burgeoning blooms, that I found Mrs. Albright inspecting a particularly vigorous climbing rose. She had become a quiet solace, a beacon of understanding in my solitary world. "Mrs. Albright," I began, my voice carefully modulated, "I find myself wondering about the late Duchess. Her portrait, it suggests a gentle soul. Her kind face, usually so open, clouded with a faint discomfort. Indeed, dear Eleanor, Lady Beatrice was delicate, a sensitive spirit. She pruned a thorny branch, her movements precise. The world, and perhaps even this grand house, can be rather overwhelming for such a nature." "Overwhelming?" I pressed gently. "Was she unwell? Did the weight of her position prove too much?" Mrs. Albright sighed, a soft, wistful sound. "She was simply not made for harsh realities, my dear. Some roses, for all their beauty, bruise easily." Her gaze met mine, full of unspoken meaning, a subtle warning perhaps, but also a profound sadness. She offered no more, her silence speaking volumes. I realized then that if I were to uncover the truth, I could not rely on the hesitant words of others. I had to find it myself. My duties often extended to tidying Lord Alaric's study, a task he tolerated more than requested. It was a room of heavy oak and leather, usually orderly to a fault, reflecting his precise nature. But one afternoon, as I emptied the wastebasket, a small, innocuous piece of paper caught my eye. It was a crumpled scrap, but upon closer inspection, I saw the distinctive pattern of a torn wax seal. It was not merely broken, it was ripped, as if opened with undue force or in a moment of frantic urgency. The imprint, though fragmented, suggested a crest I did not immediately recognize, yet it felt familiar in an unsettling way. My heart gave a small, cold lurch. Who would open a letter with such violence? And why would the Duke discard it so carelessly? A cold certainty settled in my stomach. This was more than just a discarded piece of paper. This was tangible evidence of a breach, a secret communication perhaps, forcefully intercepted. Someone had been meddling, I realized, someone with a vested interest in controlling the flow of information within these walls. The torn seal, seemingly insignificant, now screamed of manipulation, hinting at a broken trust that echoed through the very foundations of Beaumont Hall. One brisk afternoon, while accompanying Clara on a nature walk, I found Lord Alaric by the estate lake. He stood alone, his back to us, his tall frame silhouetted against the gray, still water. His shoulders were hunched, a posture I had never seen in him, one that spoke not of aristocratic bearing, but of profound, crushing weight. He was lost to the world, a man consumed by an inner sorrow. I quickly steered Clara away, unwilling to intrude upon such raw vulnerability, but not before I witnessed a sight that would forever alter my perception of him. A single choked sob escaped his lips, carried on the crisp breeze, before he quickly regained his composure, running a hand over his face. It was a rare, unguarded glimpse of the man beneath the Duke, a man whose grief was as vast and still as the lake before him. My heart, which had often perceived him as cold and distant, softened with an overwhelming wave of empathy. This was not aloofness, but a profound, debilitating pain, carefully hidden from the world. He was not merely grieving a wife, but a profound loss that had shattered his spirit, leaving him isolated in his sorrow. The image of his hunched shoulders, his silent tears, imprinted itself on my mind, deepening my desire to alleviate his unseen burden. My fingers trembled as I pushed open the hidden panel. Behind the ancient tapestry, nestled in a forgotten crevice, lay a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn smooth with time. The gold embossing faded, yet it felt heavy with untold stories. The moonlight, now a pale silver through the tall windows, seemed to hold its breath as I lifted the journal. This was it, the truth I had felt stirring in the very stones of Beaumont Hall. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation and trepidation. Every instinct urged me to open it, to unravel the secrets held within its delicate script. This was more than just a diary. It was a voice from the past, waiting to be heard. I settled onto the dusty chaise lounge, the journal resting in my hands, its secrets on the precipice of revelation. Hours melted away as I devoured the Duchess's words, illuminated by a single, flickering candle. Each entry was a delicate brushstroke, painting a portrait of a spirit slowly being crushed, not by malevolence from Alaric, but by a more insidious, calculated cruelty. Lady Seraphina Thorne's name appeared again and again, a dark thread woven through the Duchess's narrative. Seraphina, outwardly charming and solicitous, had been a viper. The Duchess wrote of her constant, subtle undermining, poisonous whispers disguised as concern, critical remarks cloaked in false empathy. She tells me Alaric finds my interest frivolous, one entry read, and that my laughter grates upon his ears, suggesting I am not Duchess enough for Beaumont Hall. But her eyes smile at my distress. I read of Seraphina's calculated attempts to isolate the Duchess, turning servants against her with fabricated complaints, intercepting invitations, and discouraging her artistic pursuits as unseemly for a Duchess. My beloved Alaric grows distant, yet when I seek comfort from my friends, Seraphina warns that they are merely gossips, not true confidants. I feel a cage closing around me, woven by unseen hands. A profound sadness settled over me, mingling with a burning anger. The flickering candlelight danced across the pages, highlighting the tears that now blurred the delicate script. Seraphina had systematically destroyed a gentle soul, not with grand gestures of malice, but with 1,000 tiny cuts. As dawn began to break, painting the bedchamber in soft hues of rose and pearl, a new heartbreaking truth emerged from the Duchess's journal. Alaric, far from being cold and indifferent, had been a loving, albeit busy husband. He had been dedicated to his duties, often traveling, but his letters, filled with affection and concern, had simply never reached his wife. Alaric's last letter spoke of his longing for my company, one entry stated, but it arrived with a torn wax seal, hastily repressed. A chill ran through me as I read words that felt hollow. Seraphina had delivered it, her smile too sweet. The letter wax seal motif, a silent testament to stolen words and hidden truths, now signified the profound depth of Seraphina's betrayal. She had intercepted and twisted Alaric's genuine affections, subtly altering the messages to make him appear remote and uncaring. The Duchess had believed Alaric was indifferent, her husband's words warped into barbs that pierced her fragile spirit. My vision of the Duke, the distant, grief-stricken man, shattered and reformed. He was not a heartless husband, but a victim of the same manipulative web that had ensnared his wife. His overwhelming sorrow now made perfect, agonizing sense. It was the grief of a man who believed his love had been insufficient, unaware that his very expressions of affection had been cruelly weaponized against him. I closed the journal, the soft thump echoing in the silent room. The weight of its revelations settled upon me, a profound and undeniable call to action. The Duchess's voice, though silenced by death, now resonated within me, demanding justice. I made a solemn vow, not only to the departed Duchess, but to myself. I would clear her name from the shadows of despair and reveal the true architect of her suffering. Lady Seraphina Thorne would answer for her insidious manipulations. I would bring peace to the heartbroken Duke Alaric and ensure Lady Clara grew up in a home free from such toxic deceit. This was my new purpose, a mission far beyond the quiet duties of a governess. My eyes, once clouded by the whispers of my own past shame, now blazed with a fierce, unyielding conviction. I carefully returned the journal to its hidden panel, sealing it away, but its truth was now irrevocably etched upon my soul. Later that morning, I found Lord Alaric in his study, the room still carrying the faint scent of old leather and his quiet melancholy. He stood before a faded miniature portrait of his late wife, his gaze distant, lost in a grief I now understood with heartbreaking clarity. Unconsciously, his thumb rubbed against the sapphire ring on his finger, the very one I had found, a tangible link to a past tainted by deceit. He was a man consumed by sorrow, but a sorrow that had been subtly poisoned, its roots tangled in Seraphina's cruel lies. He believed he had failed his wife, believed her unhappiness was a natural consequence of his perceived coldness. My heart ached for the burden he carried, a burden crafted by another's malice. Could one ever truly heal when grief itself was poisoned by deceit? The question hung in the air, unasked. His features, usually so rigid, held a profound vulnerability. He truly loved her, and that love had been twisted against them both. I realized then that approaching him with the journal would require the utmost care, a gentle hand to guide him through the painful labyrinth of a truth he had been systematically blinded to. The afternoon sun, usually a welcome guest at Beaumont Hall, felt strangely intrusive as a lavish, dark green carriage rolled up the winding drive. My heart gave an odd, apprehensive lurch. It was not merely the sound of approaching visitors that unsettled me, but a deeper, unsettling instinct that whispered of change and not for the better. Lord Alaric, his customary reserve softened only slightly by Clara's recent cheer, stood at the entrance. Beside him, I watched as the carriage door opened and a vision in vibrant rose silk descended. Lady Seraphina Thorne, Alaric's distant cousin, was a woman of dazzling smiles and perfectly coiffed dark hair, her beauty undeniable, yet it held a sharp, almost predatory edge. "Alaric, my dearest cousin," her voice trilled, a sound like expertly played harp strings as she glided towards him. She embraced him with an easy familiarity that spoke of long acquaintance, lingering perhaps a moment too long. Her eyes, the color of polished jet, flicked to me, dismissing me in an instant as merely part of the furniture. I felt an immediate prickle of distrust, a cold certainty that this charming exterior concealed a cunning heart. Later in the grand drawing room, tea was served, but the usual quiet comfort felt stretched thin by Lady Seraphina's presence. She sat across from me. Clara nestled cautiously against my side, observing us with an unnervingly keen interest. Her compliments were like delicate blossoms, beautiful yet concealing a subtle thorn. "Miss Vance, you have quite transformed little Clara," Seraphina purred, her gaze sweeping over my charge. Clara, emboldened by my presence, offered a small, shy smile. "She was quite the little mouse when last I visited. You truly have a gift for a governess from less established houses." The seemingly innocent phrase hung in the air, a whisper designed to recall my past dismissal, to remind Alaric of the stain on my ledger. I met her gaze, offering a polite, neutral smile. "Lady Clara is a delightful child, Lady Seraphina. She merely needed patience and kindness." Alaric, seated nearby, shifted slightly, a flicker of discomfort crossing his stoic features. Seraphina's smile remained, but her eyes, when they returned to me, held a calculating chill. I knew then that her charm was a weapon, and I, her target. That evening, a fierce storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest brewing within Beaumont Hall. Rain lashed against the library windows, and thunder rattled the ancient panes. I found Alaric there, lost in thought, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the lightning outside. I knew I had to speak, to try and pierce the veil of his grief and suspicion. "My lord," I began, my voice carefully low, "forgive my presumption, but I feel compelled to speak of Lady Seraphina." He turned, his gaze distant, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. The storm seemed to rage in his eyes, a reflection of the tumultuous memories Seraphina had so cleverly manipulated. Her intentions? They do not seem entirely benevolent. Alaric's jaw tightened. "Lady Seraphina is family, Miss Vance. She has always been a steadfast friend to my late wife and to me." His tone was firm, a wall of grief and loyalty that my words could not penetrate. He clung to his distorted memories, to the image of Seraphina as a devoted confidant. I saw the stubborn denial, the weight of his sorrow, and the cunning web Seraphina had woven around his heart. It was a despairing moment, a realization that without undeniable proof, my warnings would fall on deaf ears. The next morning the storm had passed, leaving the garden sparkling with fresh dew. I walked with Clara, planning our lessons, when Lady Seraphina appeared as if from nowhere, her silk gown rustling softly. She moved with an unsettling grace, her smile fixed on Clara, not on me. "My dearest Clarabelle," she cooed, bending down to the child, "would you not prefer to join me in the conservatory? I have a new book of fairy tales with the most exquisite illustrations, and perhaps a sweet or two from my own travel trunk." She pulled a sugared almond from her pocket, her eyes never leaving Clara's face. Clara, drawn by the novelty and the sweet, looked at me hesitantly. I felt a pang of loss as Seraphina gently took Clara's hand, drawing her away. Clara cast a quick, almost apologetic glance over her shoulder, but Seraphina was already leading her toward the conservatory, her arm possessively around the child. It was a stolen moment, a small yet calculated act designed to isolate me, to drive a wedge between Clara and me. The insidious reach of Lady Seraphina's influence soon spread beyond the drawing room, seeping into the very foundations of the household. In the servants' hall during our evening meal, the atmosphere was palpably colder. Mr. Caldwell, the estate manager, now displayed an open hostility that had been only thinly veiled before. "Some individual," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the table, his gaze pointedly ignoring me, "have a knack for stirring trouble. Best they know their place before they upset the delicate balance of a respected household. Wouldn't you agree?" A few of the older staff members exchanged uneasy glances, but none met my eye. It was clear Seraphina had been at work, sowing seeds of doubt about my character, reviving the old whispers about my past. I ate in quiet endurance, the food tasteless in my mouth. The walls of Beaumont Hall, which had begun to feel like a sanctuary, now seemed to close in around me, echoing with whispers of betrayal. Yet even in this isolation, my resolve hardened. I would not let them break me. Seeking solace, I retreated to the neglected rose garden, a place that had become my quiet refuge. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and struggling blooms. With my hands, I began to tend to the roses, pruning away dead wood, carefully loosening the soil around their roots. Each gentle snip of the shears, each careful movement, was a small act of defiance against the insidious poison spreading through the hall. I thought of the Duchess's journal, of the fragile spirit Seraphina had so cruelly broken. I thought of Clara, her bright, innocent joy returning under my care, now threatened again. And I thought of myself, dismissed and maligned, yet finding strength in the very act of nurturing what seemed lost. It was in these quiet moments, amidst the thorns and the tender leaves, that I found my purpose renewed. Resilience, I reflected, often blossoms most beautifully in barren ground. I stood, brushing the soil from my hands, feeling a resurgence of inner calm, a quiet determination to fight for what was right. The morning sun, usually a welcome visitor in Lady Clara's schoolroom, felt cold and revealing as I watched Lady Seraphina Thorne. She hovered over Clara's half-finished arithmetic lesson, her smile a thin, predatory line. I had stepped away for but a moment to fetch a forgotten book, and already Seraphina had found her opportunity. "Oh, Clara, darling, is this truly your sum?" Seraphina cooed, her voice dripping with feigned concern. She gently adjusted Clara's pen, her fingers lingering. Then a faint, almost imperceptible smudge appeared on the parchment. Such a struggle, poor dear. Perhaps Miss Vance has been preoccupied. My breath caught. It was a subtle, cruel act, designed to suggest neglect, to plant a seed of doubt in Alaric's mind should he ever review Clara's work. My gaze met Seraphina's across the room, and in her eyes I saw not a flicker of remorse, but a triumphant glint. I knew with a chilling certainty that this was merely the beginning of her calculated campaign against me. The bustling village market, usually a source of simple pleasures, became a stage for Seraphina's malice. I was selecting dried herbs for the kitchen, Dr. Albright coincidentally purchasing medical supplies nearby, when her carriage drew up with a dramatic flourish. My conversation with the doctor was innocent, a discussion of local remedies, yet Seraphina's gasp was loud enough to turn every head. "Eleanor! And Dr. Albright!" Her voice, a piercing shriek, cut through the market's din. "I had no idea you were so well acquainted." She clutched her gloved hand to her chest, her eyes wide with feigned shock, sweeping across the small cluster of curious villagers who had instantly gathered. Among them, I recognized Mrs. Davies, the apothecary's wife, a woman whose tongue was sharper than any blade. Dr. Albright, ever the gentleman, stepped forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Lady Seraphina, we were merely discussing a matter of tinctures for a patient." But his words were lost beneath Seraphina's next even louder pronouncement. "Oh, Miss Vance, your reputation. After all that happened at your last post, one must be so very careful to avoid any further misunderstandings." My cheeks burned, but I held her gaze, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. I could feel the whispers already igniting, spreading like wildfire through the market square, a stain on my character painted by her treacherous hand. The Duke's study, usually a sanctuary of quiet reflection, felt like a court of inquisition that evening. Seraphina sat opposite me, an embodiment of false piety, while Alaric stood by the cold fireplace, his face etched with a familiar sorrow. She had wasted no time in presenting her evidence. First, Clara's doctored schoolwork, displayed as proof of my supposed incompetence. Then the exaggerated tales from the village, twisted into a narrative of impropriety and ambition. "My dear Alaric, it pains me to bring such matters to your attention," Seraphina began, her voice a theatrical whisper. "But Miss Vance's history, coupled with these unfortunate incidents, casts a most unwelcome shadow over Beaumont Hall. Surely you recall the whispers that preceded her arrival?" I stepped forward, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "My lord, these are fabrications. Lady Seraphina has deliberately manipulated—" Alaric raised a hand, silencing me. "Eleanor," he said, his voice heavy, "I confess the evidence presented is compelling. Clara's recent work has indeed shown a decline, and the reports from the village are disturbing." His eyes, usually so guarded, held a pained confusion, a flicker of the old hurt Seraphina had so expertly exploited. I pleaded my case, recounting Seraphina's subtle malice, the forged smudge on Clara's paper, the staged encounter. But his grief-addled mind, still poisoned by Seraphina's past deceptions regarding his late wife, struggled to see beyond the immediate damning accusations. He saw a pattern of scandal, not a web of lies. The words, when they came, were not shouted, but spoken with a quiet, devastating finality. "Eleanor," Alaric began, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, "I cannot, in good conscience, retain your services here at Beaumont Hall." He swallowed hard, his jaw tight with what appeared to be profound regret, yet no less resolute. "Lady Clara requires stability, and your presence, it seems, has become a source of unrest." My world, which had only just begun to bloom, felt as though it had shattered into 1,000 pieces. I retreated to my sitting room, the familiar space now feeling hollow and cold. The large mirror above my dressing table reflected a stranger, a woman with haunted eyes, her hopes dashed, her reputation once again unjustly tarnished. The image seemed to swim, blurred by an unshed tear, a poignant echo of the very shame I had sought to outrun. My dismissal was not merely a loss of employment, it was a public condemnation, cementing the very whispers Seraphina had worked so hard to amplify. Could a reputation once broken ever truly be mended? Or was I destined to forever carry the mark of unjust blame, a reflection of a life not my own? The storm that raged within me was mirrored in the bleakness of my reflection. Yet beneath the despair, a flicker of defiance stirred. I found Clara in the hallway, her small hand clutching a well-worn storybook. Her eyes, usually so bright with newfound joy, were clouded with a heartbreaking sadness, mirroring my own. There were no words to explain the injustice, no gentle euphemisms that could soften the blow. I simply knelt, pulling her into a tight embrace, feeling the fragile tremble of her small body against mine. I must go, little one," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. Clara looked up, her lower lip quivering, but she did not cry out. Instead, she searched my eyes, and in that silent exchange, a new promise was forged. My gaze conveyed an unwavering resolve, a silent vow that this separation would not be permanent, that I would return, that I would fight for her, for Alaric, for the truth that still lay buried. Her small, trusting hand reached up to cup my cheek, a gesture of profound understanding. With a heavy heart, I stood, stepping back as the great oak door of Beaumont Hall closed behind me, a silent testament to my temporary defeat, but not my surrender. The familiar path to Mrs. Albright's cottage felt like a lifeline in the deepening twilight. My dismissal from Beaumont Hall, delivered with a heartbroken and manipulated expression by Alaric, still echoed in my ears, but a desperate hope now propelled me forward. I had nowhere else to go, no one else to turn to who might believe my truth over the Duke's word. Mrs. Albright met me at her door, her kind face etched with concern. She had heard the rumors, of course. They had flown through the village faster than any carriage, but her eyes held no judgment, only a deep, abiding compassion. I collapsed onto her cozy settee, the warmth of her hearth a stark contrast to the cold despair that had settled in my soul, and found myself weeping, finally allowing the torrent of injustice and heartbreak to break free. "There, there, child," she murmured, her gentle hand stroking my hair. "I never believed a word of it, not for a moment. You brought light back to that house, Eleanor. I saw it in Lady Clara's eyes." Her unwavering faith was a balm to my wounded spirit, a solid ground upon which I could begin to rebuild my shattered resolve. The next morning, Dr. Albright joined us, his expression grave as I recounted the full tale of Seraphina's manipulations, concluding with the hidden journal. He listened with keen attention, his hands clasped before him, a thoughtful frown on his brow. When I finished, a silence hung in the air, heavy with the weight of deceit. "We need proof, Eleanor," Dr. Albright finally said, his voice calm but firm. "Something more immediate than a long-dead Duchess's journal, though that is invaluable. Something to show her active malice." I remembered the torn wax seal, its distinctive pattern, a faint echo of the crest on Seraphina's own correspondence. Could she have made a mistake, leaving a trace of her handiwork? We spent hours poring over old letters and documents I had carefully brought from my limited belongings, searching for any inconsistency. Then, tucked away within an old account book of the late Duchess's personal expenses, we found it. A letter seemingly from Alaric to his wife, urging her to reconsider a charitable donation, its tone strangely cold and dismissive. But the handwriting, though a clever imitation, held a subtle flourish that was not Alaric's. Beneath the careful imitation, a telltale tremble in the downstrokes, a detail that betrayed the true author. It was Seraphina's hand, unmistakably, in the wax seal, though intact, showed the same peculiar flaw I had noticed on the torn one in Alaric's wastebasket. A minor imperfection in the stamp Seraphina used for her own personal correspondence. This was undeniable proof of her artifice. With the forged letter in hand, Dr. Albright and I traveled to the nearby market town, seeking the aid of Mr. Abernathy, a solicitor renowned for his sharp mind and impeccable reputation. His office, filled with towering stacks of leather-bound law books, felt like a fortress of reason against the tide of gossip and falsehood. He listened patiently as Dr. Albright laid out the evidence, his gaze shifting between the incriminating letter and my determined face. "A most intricate web, Miss Vance," Mr. Abernathy observed, tapping the forged letter with a long finger, "and woven with considerable malice." He questioned me closely, testing the consistency of my narrative, assessing my character. I answered with unwavering honesty, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I spoke of Clara's despair, the Duchess's tragic journal, and Seraphina's calculated cruelty. His expression, initially skeptical, softened into one of respect. This is a serious matter, one that could rock society to its foundations, he finally conceded, leaning back in his chair. But the evidence is compelling, and your courage, Miss Vance, is beyond reproach. I will take your case. A wave of profound relief washed over me. The legal wheels had begun to turn. Back at Mrs. Albright's cottage, the air hummed with a nervous energy. Mr. Abernathy's plan was audacious. We would host a grand gathering at Beaumont Hall, an event that would draw society's most influential figures. There, before them all, the truth would be unveiled. My hand trembled slightly as I drafted the invitations, each stroke of the pen a commitment to a path fraught with risk. This was not merely about clearing my name, but about vindicating the late Duchess, protecting Clara, and freeing Alaric from the gilded cage of Seraphina's lies. The stakes were immense. My reputation, my future, and perhaps even the Beaumont legacy hung in the balance. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of defiant purpose, a readiness to face whatever came. Meanwhile, within the grand silent walls of Beaumont Hall, Lord Alaric found himself increasingly disquieted. Seraphina, now firmly ensconced, had begun to wield her influence with alarming openness. She rearranged household affairs, dismissed long-serving staff with arbitrary cruelty, and spoke of Clara's education with a possessive air that grated on Alaric's nerves. He saw her smug demeanor, her thinly veiled contempt for anyone who dared question her authority, and it stirred a growing unease within him. The stack of overdue bills on his desk, ignored by Seraphina, despite her claims of managing the estate, only deepened his frown. He found himself thinking of Eleanor, her quiet efficiency, her genuine care for Clara, her clear, intelligent eyes. Seraphina's pronouncements now seemed hollow, her charm brittle. He had been so convinced by the carefully constructed narrative of Eleanor's impropriety, but a seed of doubt planted by Clara's unhappiness had begun to sprout. One evening, Alaric found Clara sitting alone in her room, a forgotten doll clutched to her chest, her small shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. He knelt beside her, his heart clenching at the sight of her tear-streaked face. "What troubles you, little one?" he asked, his voice softer than he realized. Clara looked up, her blue eyes wide and mournful. "I miss Eleanor," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She made the house happy. She told me stories and helped me tend the roses. Aunt Seraphina, she only wants me to be quiet." Alaric pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling a profound pang of guilt. Clara's simple, heartfelt words cut through the layers of his grief and confusion, revealing a truth he had stubbornly ignored. He realized then the depth of his mistake, the true cost of Eleanor's dismissal, and a fierce regret gripped his soul. The grand ballroom of Beaumont Hall blazed with 1,000 candles, their flames dancing in the magnificent chandeliers overhead. Each crystal prism seemed to magnify the tension that crackled in the air, illuminating the faces of society's elite gathered for a gala unlike any other. They were here for spectacle, yes, but I knew many harbored a hunger for gossip, a desire to witness the truth I had promised to unveil. My hand rested lightly on Dr. Albright's arm as we entered, Mrs. Albright a comforting presence at my side. A hush fell over the room, a collective intake of breath that vibrated through the floorboards. I felt hundreds of eyes upon me, not just the usual curious glances, but gazes sharpened by expectation, by the scandalous rumors that had surely preceded my return. My dress, a simple but elegant gown of forest green, was chosen not for ostentation, but for its quiet strength, a reflection of the woman I had become. Across the room, near the towering fireplace, stood Lord Alaric Beaumont, his posture rigid, his gaze distant. Beside him, Lady Seraphina Thorne, resplendent in crimson silk, wore a smile that was a little too bright, a little too fixed. Her eyes, however, darted nervously around the room, a subtle flicker of unease beneath her triumphant facade. The chandeliers, casting their stark, revealing light, seemed to shine a judgment upon us all. I took a deep breath, the scent of beeswax and expensive perfume filling my lungs, stealing my resolve. This was it, the moment I had fought for, the chance to reclaim my name and set the record straight for those who could no longer speak for themselves. Every whisper, every sidelong glance only strengthened my purpose. My heart beat a steady rhythm, a drumbeat of defiance against the lies that had permeated these very walls. As we navigated the murmuring crowd, Lady Seraphina's voice, piercingly sweet, cut through the din. "Miss Vance, is that truly you? I confess I hardly recognized you outside the village lanes." Her smile was a predatory slash, her eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "One truly must commend your resilience, appearing at such an esteemed gathering after your unfortunate dismissal. Most would have retreated into obscurity." A ripple of hushed whispers spread through the nearby guests. Seraphina had wasted no time. Her words, delivered with a practiced air of concern, were designed to remind everyone of the stain on my reputation, to ensure her narrative remained unchallenged. I met her gaze, my own unwavering. I would not allow her to dictate the terms of this encounter. "Lady Seraphina," I replied, my voice calm and clear, carrying further than I expected in the sudden quiet. "I believe there are many aspects of my time at Beaumont Hall that society has yet to fully comprehend. Sometimes one must emerge from obscurity to shed light upon the darkness." My gaze flickered to Alaric, who stood a few paces behind Seraphina, his expression unreadable, yet a flicker of curiosity, perhaps even recognition, stirred in his eyes. Seraphina's smile faltered, a hairline crack in her perfect facade. She had expected me to cower, to stammer, to retreat. She had not expected defiance. "Indeed," she purred, recovering quickly. "And what dark corners do you propose to illuminate, Miss Vance? Perhaps your own questionable past, before you ever stepped foot in this noble household?" Her words were a direct thrust, aimed at the very heart of my vulnerability. But I was no longer the frightened girl who had first arrived here. I merely offered her a small, knowing smile, a silent promise that her reign of deceit was nearing its end. "Perhaps," I said, my voice gaining strength, "we might begin with the darkness that overshadowed the late Duchess's life." I turned to face the room, raising my voice slightly to command attention. For too long, the tragedy of her passing has been shrouded in misconception, fueled by insidious whispers and deliberate falsehoods. I stepped forward, pulling the leather-bound journal from beneath my shawl, holding it aloft for all to see. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. Seraphina's face went white, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning horror. Dr. Albright stepped forward, taking the journal from my hands and presenting it to the solicitor, who had moved to stand beside me. The solicitor, a man of formidable reputation, cleared his throat, his presence adding an air of undeniable authority to the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing through the stunned silence, "this is the personal journal of the late Duchess Eleanor Beaumont. Its contents, discovered by Miss Vance, reveal a truth that has long been suppressed." He opened the journal, its delicate pages rustling, and began to read. The Duchess's elegant script, once a private comfort, now became a public testament. He read entries detailing Seraphina's constant undermining, her subtle cruelties, her poisonous whispers that painted Alaric as cold and indifferent, slowly chipping away at the Duchess's fragile spirit. Gasps erupted, turning to murmurs of shock and outrage as the full extent of Seraphina's manipulation was laid bare. Seraphina let out a choked cry. "Lies, all lies, a desperate governess fabricating tales." But her voice was shrill, lacking conviction, already defeated. The solicitor continued, his voice unwavering, reading a particularly damning entry that described how Seraphina had intercepted and altered letters between the Duchess and Alaric, twisting words of affection into phrases of dismissal. The weight of the truth settled upon the room, heavy and undeniable, and I watched as Seraphina's vibrant crimson gown seemed to fade, reflecting the draining color from her face. Lord Alaric, who had stood frozen, listening with growing horror, now stumbled forward. His face was a mask of raw anguish, tears glistening in his eyes. "It is true," he choked out, his voice hoarse with emotion, cutting through the stunned silence. Every word. I was blind, manipulated by the very person I trusted. He turned his shattered gaze to the assembled guests. My late wife, she suffered not from a fragile mind, but from a broken heart, shattered by deceit. He then turned to me, his gaze softening, yet still etched with profound regret. Eleanor, he began, his voice barely a whisper, yet it commanded the attention of every soul in the room. Miss Vance, I wronged you. I dismissed you, not because of any failing on your part, but because my own grief had made me vulnerable to further manipulation. I believed the lies not only about you, but about my dear wife. For that, I am profoundly sorry. He reached into his waistcoat pocket, pulling out a small, crumpled piece of paper. I found this, he announced, holding up a torn wax seal, its distinctive crest clearly visible. A seal from a letter I sent my wife, one she never received, intercepted and replaced with a forged one by Seraphina. The evidence was irrefutable, the final proof of the web of deceit. His confession was not an act of pride, but of profound contrition, a public unburdening of a heart long poisoned by lies. The guests who moments before had been whispering now stared at Alaric with a mix of shock and dawning respect. His vulnerability, his raw honesty, was a powerful counterpoint to Seraphina's calculated cruelty. I met his gaze, my heart aching for the suffering he had endured, but also swelling with pride for the man he was becoming. The truth, finally, had set him free. The collective gaze of society, once fixed on me with suspicion, now turned on Lady Seraphina Thorne, sharp and merciless. Her crimson gown, which had seemed so triumphant moments before, now appeared like a scarlet mark of shame. Panic flashed in her eyes. With a desperate cry, she attempted to flee, pushing past startled guests towards the ballroom doors. But the gathered assembly, once so easily swayed by gossip, had found its voice. Whispers of condemnation became pointed remarks, then outright accusations. "A monster," someone cried, "to torment a grieving Duchess." Another added, "and to accuse an innocent governess." Hands reached out, not to grasp her, but to block her path, a human wall of righteous indignation. She was cornered, trapped by the very society she had sought to dominate. Her protests were frantic, incoherent, unraveling into desperate sobs. The elegant veneer she had so carefully crafted shattered, revealing the pathetic, grasping woman beneath. Mr. Caldwell, who had stood stiffly by, now averted his eyes in disgust, the last vestiges of his misplaced loyalty evaporating. The ballroom doors, which had once seemed to welcome her with such grandeur, now opened only to usher her into utter disgrace. Seraphina was practically pushed from the hall, her frantic cries fading as the heavy doors swung shut behind her, sealing her fate. A profound silence descended, then a collective sigh of relief. The air felt lighter, cleansed. The chandeliers seemed to sparkle with a renewed brilliance, no longer casting shadows of deceit, but a hopeful light upon a future unburdened by lies. What a powerful force the truth could be, once it was finally given a voice. The first blush of dawn stretched across the eastern sky, painting the grand windows of Beaumont Hall with hues of rose and gold. I stood by my window, watching the quiet awakening of the estate, a profound sense of calm settling over me after the tumultuous night. The chandeliers in the ballroom below, now dark, no longer pulsed with the harsh, revealing light of accusation, but rather held the silent promise of a new day. A deep breath filled my lungs, free of the oppressive tension that had clung to this house for so long. Seraphina's departure had not merely removed a villain, it had cleansed the very air, leaving behind a stillness I had only dreamed of. I allowed myself a small, private smile, a quiet triumph for the truth that had finally been spoken. My heart felt lighter than it had in years. I thought of Clara and then of Alaric, both now free from the insidious web of deceit that had bound them. The path ahead would not be without its challenges, but for the first time, it felt genuinely hopeful. I turned from the window, my resolve solidifying, ready to face the day and the healing it promised. I found Clara in her nursery, a room that, in my absence, had once again grown quiet, though not yet entirely devoid of the warmth I had brought. She sat by the window, a picture book open on her lap, but her gaze was fixed on the garden outside, her small shoulders hunched. The sight sent a pang through my chest, a reminder of the joy Seraphina had threatened to steal. "Clara," I whispered, my voice soft. "My—" She turned, her eyes usually downcast, widening with an incredulous hope. For a moment, she seemed too stunned to move. Then a radiant smile broke across her face, transforming her entire demeanor. She launched herself into my arms, clinging to me with a strength that belied her small frame. "Eleanor!" she cried, her voice muffled against my shoulder, a sound more precious than any music. I held her close, tears pricking my eyes, feeling a rush of profound belonging. "Oh, my dear girl, I'm back," I murmured, stroking her soft hair. Her excited chatter quickly filled the room, recounting all that had happened, though her words were mostly a blur of happy sounds. In her embrace, I knew that no title or fortune could ever replace the simple, unconditional love of this child. Later that morning, a summons came from Lord Alaric. I found him in his study, the very room where he had once dismissed me, now bathed in the gentle morning light. He stood by the grand desk, his posture less rigid than I remembered, his gaze direct but softened by a visible humility. His aristocratic features, usually etched with a distant sorrow, now held a profound remorse. "Miss Vance," he began, his voice deeper than usual, "I find myself profoundly indebted to you. Your courage last night, it unveiled a truth I was too blind, too grief-stricken to see." He moved from behind the desk, a gesture that seemed to strip away a layer of his ducal formality. "I understand now the depth of Seraphina's perfidy, and my unwitting part in my late wife's suffering. For that, and for my appalling misjudgment in dismissing you, I offer my sincerest, most heartfelt apology." My heart ached for the pain I saw in his eyes, a pain now free from the manipulation that had previously clouded it. "Your Grace, there is no need to apologize," I replied, my voice gentle. "The past is behind us." He shook his head. "No, there is every need. I was wrong, deeply wrong, and I would consider it an immense honor, Miss Vance, if you would consider remaining at Beaumont Hall, not merely as Clara's governess, but as a valued, trusted partner in rebuilding this household and its legacy." His earnest gaze held mine, a silent plea for a second chance, not just for me, but for the very soul of Beaumont Hall itself. I considered his offer, seeing not the cold Duke I had first encountered, but a changed man, humbled and truly repentant. The midday meal was a quiet affair, yet it hummed with a warmth previously unknown in Beaumont Hall's vast dining hall. Alaric, Clara, Dr. Albright, and I gathered at a smaller, more intimate table. The heavy silence that once dominated these meals was replaced by light, genuine conversation. Clara, beaming, recounted a story of a robin she'd seen in the garden, and Alaric listened with a gentle smile that rarely touched his lips before. Dr. Albright, ever perceptive, observed the nascent camaraderie. "It seems the air here has cleared considerably," he remarked, a twinkle in his eye. Alaric nodded, a faint blush rising to his cheeks. "Indeed, Doctor, and I believe it is largely thanks to Miss Vance's steadfast courage and unwavering spirit." I felt a blush of my own, but also a deep sense of contentment. We spoke of the estate, of Clara's lessons, of the quiet plans for the future. It felt less like a formal meal and more like a gathering of a found family, each person finding solace and strength in the presence of the others. This quiet healing, this nascent camaraderie, was a stark contrast to the stifling formality and hidden strife that had once defined life at Beaumont Hall. It was a beginning, a shared journey towards a brighter future. As evening settled, Alaric led Dr. Albright and me back to his study, maps and ledgers now spread across the desk. Gone was the image of the Duke burdened by solitary grief. In his place was a man filled with a new, vibrant purpose. "I have given much thought to what we discussed, Miss Vance," he began, his voice resonating with enthusiasm, "and your ideas for the unused estate buildings are truly inspired." He pointed to a section of the old stable house on the map. "This wing, for instance, could be ideally suited for a village school, providing education for the local children who currently lack such opportunity." Dr. Albright nodded vigorously, his eyes shining with shared vision. "And perhaps," the doctor added, The old gatehouse could be repurposed as a small clinic, offering much-needed medical care to the community. Alaric's gaze met mine, a brilliant smile transforming his features. A school and a clinic, Miss Vance. A true legacy of service rather than mere inheritance. I felt a deep satisfaction, a profound joy in this shared endeavor, to transform this grand, somber estate into a beacon of hope and assistance for the community, a living testament to compassion and purpose. This was a future I could embrace wholeheartedly, a partnership of minds and hearts. Twilight softened the edges of the newly tended rose garden as Alaric and I walked among the fragrant bushes. The air was cool, carrying the sweet, restorative scent of countless blooms. My earlier efforts, once a quiet act of defiance and personal solace, now felt like a shared endeavor, a testament to the growth we had both experienced. A particularly vibrant crimson rose, newly unfurled, caught my eye. "You have truly brought this garden back to life, Miss Vance," Alaric said, his voice low, his gaze lingering on the delicate petals. "Much like you have brought life back to this house, and to Clara." My heart quickened at his words, the compliment extending far beyond the beauty of the roses. "It simply needed tending, Your Grace," I replied, my voice a little breathless. "Care and patience, and the belief that something beautiful could still emerge from what seemed lost." He stopped, turning to face me fully, the last rays of sunlight catching the warmth in his eyes. "And perhaps that is true for us all," he murmured, his hand gently brushing a stray rose petal from my sleeve. A palpable connection, unspoken yet undeniable, bloomed between us amidst the twilight and the roses. I felt my own unspoken longing mirrored in his gaze, a promise of something profound unfolding in the quiet beauty of the reclaimed garden. The library, usually a bastion of silent sorrow, now held a different kind of quiet. Lord Alaric Beaumont sat by the unlit hearth, a rare volume of verse forgotten in his hand. His gaze drifted to the empty chair across from him, the one Eleanor often occupied, a book she had been reading still resting on its cushion. He saw not just the chair, but Eleanor herself, her courage that had faced down Seraphina's venom, her kindness that had coaxed Clara's laughter, her fierce intelligence that had unraveled a decade of deceit. He had been so blind, so consumed by a grief that Seraphina had expertly poisoned. He had believed himself noble in his sorrow, steadfast in his reclusiveness, when in truth he had merely been a pawn in a cruel game. It was Eleanor the Governess society had scorned who had shown him the true meaning of nobility, of purpose beyond inherited titles. He loved her not for her modest status, nor for any social gain she might offer, but for the incandescent spirit that had brought light back to his desolate hall and heart. He desired not merely a companion, but a partner, an equal in every sense. He knew with a certainty that settled deep within his soul that his future and the future of Beaumont Hall lay with her. He rose, the book now placed carefully beside Eleanor's, a resolute light in his eyes. He would wait no longer. The morning light in the rose garden was a painter's dream, dappling through the leaves to illuminate dew-kissed petals. Every bloom seemed to exhale a sigh of renewal, a testament to the care Clara and I had poured into this forgotten space. As I knelt to admire a particularly vibrant damask rose, Alaric's shadow fell over me. I rose, my heart quickening at the earnestness in his eyes. "Eleanor," he began, his voice deeper than usual, "I have found myself bereft of words for too long. You have brought life back to this desolate place and to my own shattered heart. You have shown me what true courage and purpose mean." He took my hands, his touch warm and steady. "I ask you not to merely share my name or title, but to share my life, my purpose. To stand beside me as an equal in every endeavor. Will you marry me, Eleanor?" He knelt then, not with the practiced grace of a society suitor, but with a profound sincerity that brought tears to my eyes. In his outstretched hand, he held a single perfect rose, newly bloomed, its crimson petals mirroring the flush on my cheeks. This was not a proposal born of duty or expectation, but of profound respect and genuine affection. "Yes," I whispered, the word a joyous affirmation that echoed through the peaceful garden. "Yes, Alaric, I will." He rose, a radiant smile transforming his usually somber features, and drew me into an embrace that sealed our future. A future I knew with absolute certainty would be one of shared purpose and enduring love. Later that day, at Mrs. Albright's cozy cottage, the news of our engagement was met with exclamations of joy and warm embraces. Dr. Albright, ever the astute observer, clapped Alaric on the shoulder, his eyes twinkling. A partnership forged not in ambition, but in truth and shared humanity, he remarked. I felt a blush creep up my neck, but a profound contentment settled within me. Then Alaric took my hand again, his gaze unwavering. Eleanor, there is something more. He produced a small velvet box. The Beaumont sapphire, though storied, carries the weight of a past I wish to leave behind. This, he said, opening the box to reveal a ring, unlike any I had ever seen, is for our future. It was a delicate band of gold, intricately carved with a small, graceful oak leaf, a subtle nod to my family's crest, a symbol of strength and endurance. Set within it was a single, brilliant emerald, mirroring the color of my eyes and the vibrant life we planned to cultivate. It symbolizes our chosen legacy, he explained softly, one built on strength, on growth, and on the quiet resilience you taught me. A future where our worth is defined by what we build, not merely what we inherit. Tears pricked my eyes again. He had understood me completely, offering not the weight of tradition, but the promise of a shared, meaningful path. I slipped the ring onto my finger, its cool metal a tangible connection to the deep, unwavering love reflected in Alaric's proud smile. The village square, usually a cacophony of commerce, buzzed with an added layer of genuine warmth as Alaric and I walked hand in hand through the market. Our engagement had been announced, and the villagers, who had watched our unfolding drama with quiet apprehension, now greeted us with smiles and heartfelt congratulations. Clara, her hand nestled securely in mine, waved to a group of children, a bright, unburdened laugh escaping her lips. Dr. and Mrs. Albright walked proudly beside us, their faces alight with shared joy. "My lady, 1,000 congratulations," called Mrs. Henderson, the baker, pressing a warm loaf into my hands. "We always knew you would bring light back to Beaumont Hall." Alaric, usually reserved, returned their greetings with an open smile, discussing with enthusiasm the plans for the new village school and the expanded clinic. He spoke of new opportunities, of shared responsibilities, and of a future where the hall would truly serve its community. I felt a profound sense of belonging, an acceptance more precious than any fleeting societal approval. This was our chosen path, and its impact was already tangible in the vibrant life pulsing through the heart of our village. Later that evening, in the hall's main parlor, the flickering firelight cast a warm glow over Clara as she played with a new set of wooden blocks, constructing a fanciful tower. Alaric sat beside me, his hand gently covering mine, as we watched her. A profound sense of contentment settled over me, a peace I had once thought unattainable. I looked at Alaric, this man who had once been a distant, grief-stricken figure, now softened by love and purpose. I reflected on my journey, from the public shame that had driven me to Beaumont Hall, to the quiet triumph of uncovering truth and reclaiming dignity. The Duke's initial rejection, his unwitting role in my past humiliation, had not been my undoing but my liberation. It had freed me from a path I never truly desired, guiding me instead to my true self, to a life of meaning I could not have imagined. Indeed, sometimes our greatest defeats become the foundation for our most meaningful victories. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of deep gold and fiery crimson, Alaric, Clara, and I stood together at the main entrance of Beaumont Hall. The grand facade, once imposing and somber, now felt imbued with warmth, a testament to the love and purpose that had reclaimed its ancient stones. Clara, nestled between us, pointed to a distant flock of birds, her eyes bright with wonder. "Our future," Alaric murmured, his gaze sweeping over the estate, then settling on me, "is unwritten, Eleanor, but I know it will be one of shared endeavors, of growth, and of a love that will only deepen with time." I squeezed his hand, a profound sense of fulfillment swelling in my chest. We were not merely building a home, but a legacy, a family founded on truth, a community nurtured by compassion. The path I never chose had led me to a truer destiny than any I could have conceived. When does a path we never chose become the truest one of all?